The first time it happened, I didn't say anything. I told myself it was normal, that I was overreacting, that this was just how things worked now. My name is Caroline. I was 67 years old, sitting in a cold waiting room, holding a clipboard filled with forms I had already filled out before. Name, date of birth, insurance number. No space for context, no space for explanation, just boxes. A young nurse called my name without looking up. She pronounced it wrong. I didn't correct her. I followed her down a long hallway, past doors labeled with words I didn't understand anymore. She took my blood pressure, typed numbers into a screen, asked questions without waiting for answers. Any pain? Any dizziness? Any changes? I started to speak. She was already gone. That was when I realized something uncomfortable. I wasn't being treated poorly. I was being processed. At my age, efficiency replaces curiosity. I left the appointment with a printout and no clarity. At home, I placed the papers on the kitchen table and stared at them. Test results, recommendations, follow-ups. Nothing alarming, nothing reassuring. My children called later that week. They asked how the appointment went. Fine, I said, because that was the word I had trained myself to use. But fine is not the same as understood. Over the next few months, it happened again. Different clinics, different faces, same feeling. Being rushed, being simplified, being spoken about, not to. I started preparing questions in advance, writing them neatly on paper, and each time I ran out of time before I ran out of concerns. One afternoon, I sat in my car after an appointment and didn't turn the engine on. I rested my head against the steering wheel and felt something unexpected. Anger. Not loud. Focused. I had spent decades being agreeable, a good patient, a polite woman, someone who didn't want to be difficult. But somewhere along the way, politeness had begun to erase me. That night, I pulled out my notebook. Not to journal, to decide. I wrote one sentence. I will not leave another room confused. I didn't know how I would enforce that. I just knew I was done nodding when I didn't understand. The next appointment was 2 weeks later. Different doctor, same building. When he started speaking quickly, I interrupted him. Not sharply, clearly. Please slow down, I said. I need to understand this. He paused, looked at me, really looked, and for the first time in a long while, the conversation changed direction, not because I raised my voice, because I stopped disappearing. As I walked out of that office, something shifted, not the system, me. I realized then that this wasn't just about health care. It was about how easily older people are trained to accept less clarity, less time, less respect. I had accepted it too, until I didn't. And that decision was going to cost me comfort, but it was going to give me something better. My voice. I didn't become bold overnight. I became deliberate. At my next appointment, I arrived early, not to be polite, but to be prepared. I brought a notebook, a pen, and the questions I had learned not to rush through. When the nurse asked me to summarize my concerns quickly, I smiled. "I'll take the time I need," I said. "Thank you." She blinked, surprised, then nodded. It was a small moment, but it mattered. Inside the exam room, the doctor spoke faster than I could follow. I raised my hand slightly. "Please pause," I said. "I want to make sure I understand what you just said." He stopped, not irritated, attentive. He explained again, slower this time. I asked him to repeat a term, then another. The appointment lasted 5 minutes longer than usual. When I left, I felt tired, but clear. At home, I realized something important. Advocating for myself didn't make me difficult. It made me present. The shift carried into other areas of my life. At the pharmacy, when the technician rushed through instructions, I asked her to slow down. At the insurance office, when a representative spoke in vague language, I asked for specifics. Each time, my voice shook a little less. My children noticed the change. My daughter called after receiving a copy of a medical summary I had sent her. "You sound different," she said. "More firm." "I'm trying to understand my own life," I replied. She was quiet for a moment. "I'm proud of you," she said. That surprised me. I hadn't realized how much of my silence had taught them to speak for me. A few weeks later, I was asked to join a patient feedback group at the clinic. They needed experienced voices. I laughed softly when I read the email. Experienced. That was one word for it. At the first meeting, I sat with others my age, men and women who shared the same tired patience, the same quiet frustration. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't complain. I explained what it feels like to leave confused, what it costs to pretend you understand, how easily dignity erodes when no one checks. People nodded. Some looked relieved. After the meeting, a woman touched my arm. "I thought it was just me," she said. "It never is," I replied. That night, I realized something deeper. This wasn't about changing the system entirely. It was about refusing to shrink inside it. I still felt fear sometimes, fear of being labeled, fear of being dismissed, but fear no longer decided my behavior. Clarity did. And clarity, I was learning, is contagious. The resistance didn't come from strangers. It came from the places that were supposed to help. At my next follow-up appointment, the tone was different. Not hostile, cautious. The nurse read my name carefully this time. The doctor reviewed my chart longer than usual. "You've been asking more questions lately," he said, not unkindly. "Yes," I replied, "because I need to understand my health." He nodded, but something shifted. The appointment felt slower, heavier, as if my clarity had made the process less convenient. A week later, I received a letter from the insurance company. More forms, more explanations requested, more delays. I felt the familiar urge to give up, to tell myself it wasn't worth the effort, that this was just how things worked. But something had changed. I wasn't angry. I was steady. I called the number on the letter. After 20 minutes on hold, a representative answered. She spoke quickly. I stopped her. "Please don't rush," I said. "I'm taking notes." There was silence, then a sigh, then a slower voice. By the end of the call, the issue wasn't resolved, but it was documented. That mattered. Later that month, the clinic invited me to speak at a staff meeting, not officially, informally, just to share perspective. I considered declining. Old instincts whispered that it wasn't my place. But I remembered the woman who said, "I thought it was just me." So I went. I didn't accuse, I described what it feels like to sit in a room where time is rationed, what it means to nod because you don't want to be difficult, how easily silence becomes expectation. The room was quiet, not defensive, attentive. Afterward, a young resident approached me. "I didn't realize how rushed we sound," she said. "Thank you." That night, I sat in my living room feeling something unfamiliar, not exhaustion, alignment. But the hardest moment came at home. My son called and said, "Mom, maybe you're pushing too hard. Stress isn't good for you." I understood his concern, but I also recognized the pattern, protection disguised as control. "I'm not pushing," I said calmly. "I'm participating." He paused. "I just don't want you to get overwhelmed." "I've been overwhelmed quietly for years. This is different." The line went silent. Then he said, "I didn't know." Neither had I. I realized then that advocating for myself wasn't just changing appointments, it was changing relationships. People had to adjust to a version of me that didn't disappear for comfort, and not everyone liked that. But discomfort, I was learning, isn't harm. It's growth trying to find its place. I didn't know what the system would do next, whether it would resist or adapt, but I knew something for certain. I wasn't going back to nodding through my own life. The peace didn't come from winning. It came from clarity. Not every phone call ended with answers. Not every appointment went smoothly. The system didn't suddenly become kind, but it became navigable because I no longer entered rooms prepared to disappear. I kept notes now. I asked for summaries. I requested time, not aggressively, confidently. Something subtle happened over the following months. People adjusted their tone. Doctors explained more carefully. Staff slowed down. Conversations became conversations again. Not because I demanded respect, because I expected it. At home, my children stopped checking for me and started checking with me. They asked what I thought, what I understood, what I wanted to do next. One evening, my daughter said something quietly. "I think you taught us something," she said, "about not shrinking." I smiled. I'm still learning it myself. I stopped measuring progress by outcomes. I measured it by how I felt when I left a room. Clear, grounded, whole. There were still moments of fatigue, moments when it would have been easier to nod and move on. But ease was no longer my priority. Understanding was. One afternoon, I sat in the same parking lot where I had once rested my head against the steering wheel. This time, I noticed how different my posture felt. Upright, present. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't fighting. I was participating in my own life. If you are listening to this and recognizing something familiar, if you've been told to be patient when what you needed was to be heard, please remember this. Advocating for yourself is not confrontation. It is clarity. And clarity is not rude. It is respectful. At 67, I didn't change the system. I changed how I moved through it. And that made all the difference. Quietly, firmly, with my voice intact.